I almost walked right past her. If she hadn't said, "Mom," I wouldn't have recognized my own daughter. She was sitting alone in a mall food court, wearing worn-out sneakers and a faded uniform, counting loose coins just to afford a cup of coffee. This was the same daughter who, 2 years earlier, drove a brand-new SUV. The same daughter who worked as a nurse. The same daughter who had everything going for her. And as I stood there watching her hands shake while she counted change, I realized something terrifying. Someone hadn't just failed her. Someone had taken her life apart on purpose. They took her money. They took her home. They took her child. And they thought she was too scared to fight back. What they didn't realize was that I was watching. Bait. And I wasn't about to let them get away with it. I almost didn't recognize her. If she hadn't said, "Mom," I would have walked right past her like a stranger. She was sitting alone in the mall food court, shoulders hunched forward, eyes fixed on the table like she was trying to disappear. Her sneakers were scuffed and worn thin. The grocery store uniform she wore looked 2 sizes too big, the name tag barely clinging to the fabric. And in front of her was a small pile of coins, quarters, dimes, pennies, spread carefully across the table. She was counting them. My daughter, counting change just to buy coffee. 2 years earlier, I'd helped her put a down payment on a brand-new SUV. She was a registered nurse with a stable job, a husband, a house, and a 4-year-old daughter she adored. She had worked too hard for too long to end up like this. Yet there she was. "Sophia," I said softly, walking toward her. Her head snapped up, panic flashing across her face before she forced a smile. "Hi, Mom." The dark circles under her eyes were impossible to miss. So was the way her hands trembled as she pushed the coins into a neat stack and slid them toward the coffee cup like she was embarrassed to be seen. "What are you doing here?" I asked, sitting down across from her. "And where's Emma?" Her jaw tightened. She's with Richard and his mom. They took her to the park." It was Wednesday afternoon, Sophia's day off. She never missed a chance to spend time with her daughter. "And your car?" I asked casually. "I didn't see it outside." Her smile slipped for half a second. "Richard needed it. His truck broke down." "When?" "Last month." Something cold settled in my stomach. "So what have you been driving?" She shrugged. "The bus, it's fine, saves money." Nothing about this was fine. I looked at her more closely then. The weight loss. The way her uniform hung loosely on her frame. The way she kept glancing at her phone like she was waiting for permission to exist. "Sophia," I said gently, reaching for her hand. She pulled it back immediately. "I'm okay, Mom. Really, I just need to go. I have to catch the 3:15 bus." "I'll drive you home." "No." The word came out too fast, too sharp, then softer. "Please don't, I'm fine." We stood there surrounded by noise, families laughing, plates clattering, the smell of fried food hanging in the air. Yet my daughter looked terrified. Like someone who'd learned the hard way that saying the wrong thing could cost her everything. "Where are you living now?" I asked. She blinked. "What do you mean, same place?" "The house on Maple Street, the one I'd helped them buy, the one with the oak tree in the yard." But her eyes told a different story. "When was the last time you ate a real meal?" I asked instead. "I'm not hungry." "Sophia Marie," I said, using the voice she grew up with. "Sit down." She hesitated, then obeyed. I came back with a tray piled with food, and the way she ate, fast, mechanical, like she didn't know when she'd get another chance, made my chest tighten. "He's checking up on you," I said quietly. She froze. "Richard," I continued, "he monitors your phone, doesn't he?" Her chopstick slipped from her fingers. "Talk to me," I said. Tears welled in her eyes. I can't. If I tell you, it'll make everything worse. Worse than this. Her shoulders collapsed. They control everything, she whispered. The house, the car, my money, even Emma. My heart pounded. What do you mean control? If I don't do exactly what they say, they'll make sure I never see my daughter again. The noise around us faded into nothing. She told me about the bank accounts she no longer had access to, the papers she was pressured into signing, the allowance she was given like a child, $20 a week, the threats, the fear. And then she said the words that changed everything. I'm living in their garage. I felt my breath leave my body. They said I have to prove I'm responsible before I can sleep inside, she whispered. Emma's room is upstairs. I only see her when they allow it. I reached across the table and took her hand again. This time, she didn't pull away. Listen to me, I said slowly. Go home, act normal, don't tell anyone we talked. Her eyes widened. Why? Because they think you're alone, I said, and that's their biggest mistake. That night, instead of going home, I drove past my daughter's old house. And what I saw through the garage door made me realize this wasn't just abuse. It was a crime. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my daughter sitting on an air mattress, tucked away like something shameful. A nurse, a mother, reduced to living in a garage while strangers rented the home she helped pay for. By sunrise, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was focused. I'd spent over 3 decades working in real estate law. I knew what deception looked like on paper. I knew how abusers hid behind contracts and signatures. And I knew one thing for certain: nothing Sophia had described happened by accident. So I started where lies always unravel. Paper. The first call I made was to Margaret, a woman who had worked beside me for 15 years before I retired. She knew my voice well enough to hear the urgency immediately. I need you, I said, and I need you discreet. Within minutes, she was pulling public records on the house on Maple Street. The second call went to James, an old colleague who had traded legal briefs for surveillance work years ago. I need eyes, I told him. Photos, video, and proof of living conditions. He didn't ask questions. He never did. By mid-morning, I was already in my car. I drove past the Maple Street house slowly, my heart sinking as soon as it came into view. The lawn was trimmed, but untouched. The windows were dark, and planted right in the middle of the yard was a bright white sign. For rent. I pulled over and took pictures. Close-ups, wide shots, every angle. Through the window, the house was empty. No furniture, no toys, no signs of life. The home my daughter helped buy had been stripped clean. Then I drove to Diane's house. She always bragged about that place. The neighborhood, the schools, the security, 3-car garage, manicured hedges. I parked down the street and waited. At 7:32 p.m., I saw Richard pull into the driveway, driving Sophia's car. He walked straight inside like it belonged to him, which, apparently, it did now. 45 minutes later, the garage door opened. And there it was. A concrete floor, an air mattress pushed into the corner, a plastic bin holding clothes, a single space heater that looked like a fire hazard waiting to happen. And my daughter, sitting on the floor, eating from a paper bag. I felt something inside me snap. I took photos, then video, every detail, the mattress, the heater, the isolation. This wasn't temporary hardship. This was deliberate humiliation. The next morning, James sent me his first update. Diane going through Sophia's belongings, on video. No permission, no shame, just control. Then came the bank. With Sophia's written consent, I requested her account history from before Richard, consolidated everything. What came back made my hands shake. Money missing. Transfers to accounts in Richard's name only. Rental income from Maple Street, thousands per month, never shared. Worse. Signatures that weren't hers. Someone had forged documents to remove her access. By Wednesday afternoon, I had a folder thick enough to end a marriage. But I needed one more thing. Leverage. That's when I met with Catherine Park, a family law attorney known for moving fast and showing no mercy. She flipped through the evidence slowly. The photos, the bank records, the forged signatures. Then she looked up and smiled. "This," she said, tapping the folder, "is financial abuse, coercion, fraud, and parental alienation." My voice stayed calm. "How fast can we act?" "I can file tomorrow," she replied, "and I can request emergency custody within a week." That evening, I met Sophia again at the same food court. She looked worse than before. "They didn't let me see Emma last night," she whispered. "Diane said I was being punished for being irresponsible." I reached into my bag and placed the folder on the table. "You're not irresponsible," I said. "You're trapped, and we're about to break it." Her hands hovered over the folder like she was afraid to touch it. "Friday," I continued, "we go to court and everything changes." She swallowed hard. "What if they fight back?" I met her eyes. "Then they'll have to explain a lot of things they never thought anyone would see." By Thursday night, the court date was set. They still thought my daughter was powerless. They still thought no one was coming for her. Friday morning arrived too quickly. The kind of morning where the sky is clear and bright, cruelly cheerful for a day that could change a person's life forever. I picked Sophia up at exactly 8 o'clock. She stepped out of the garage quietly, careful not to make noise, like someone who had learned that being seen was dangerous. She was wearing the only professional outfit she had left, a black dress that hung loosely on her frame. She apologized for how it looked. "Don't," I told her. "Let them see what they did." She nodded, gripping her purse like it was the only thing anchoring her to the ground. The drive to the courthouse was silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that mattered was already hanging in the air between us. Fear, hope, and the possibility of finally being heard. Inside the courthouse, the air felt heavy. Cold marble floors, security gates, voices echoing down long hallways. Sophia stayed close to me, eyes lowered, shoulders tense. And then I saw them. Richard stood near the elevators with his lawyer, trying and failing to look confident. Diane was beside him, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line of annoyance rather than concern. She wasn't worried. That told me everything. Diane spotted us first. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Sophia wasn't alone. "What is this?" she snapped. "You can't afford an attorney." Before I could answer, Catherine stepped forward. "Actually," she said calmly, "my client can, and I represent her." Diane's face drained of color. Richard looked from Sophia to the attorney, panic flickering across his expression for just a second, long enough for me to see it. Their lawyer, a young man who clearly hadn't expected this, frowned. "What is this hearing about?" Catherine held up the folder. "Emergency custody," she said, "and financial abuse." Everything stopped. In a small conference room outside the courtroom, Catherine laid the evidence out methodically. Photos of the garage, bank records, forged signatures, rental income statements, video footage of Diane going through Sophia's belongings. Richard's hands started shaking. "This is out of context," Diane said sharply. "We were helping her." Catherine didn't look up. Helping doesn't involve forgery. Richard's lawyer leaned closer to the documents, flipping pages faster now. "You rented out marital property without consent," Catherine continued. "You withheld access to earned income. You isolated the child from her mother. and you forced my client to live in a garage." I watched Richard's face collapse. Diane opened her mouth, then closed it again. Their lawyer looked up slowly. "Is any of this inaccurate?" Silence. That was the moment the power shifted. The judge called us in. Sophia's hands were trembling as she stood beside Catherine. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but steady. She told the truth. About the money, the threats, the nights in the garage, the fear of losing her daughter. The judge listened, carefully, closely. When Catherine presented the evidence, the courtroom went still. After a long pause, the judge spoke. "Effective immediately," he said. "Temporary full custody is granted to the mother." Sophia gasped. "An emergency order will be issued to retrieve the child today," he continued. "And all marital assets are to be frozen pending review." Diane stood up. "This is ridiculous." "Sit down," the judge said sharply. I'd never heard someone lose authority so fast. By the time we walked out of the courtroom, Sophia was shaking, not from fear, but from shock. "We're getting Emma," she whispered. "Yes," I said, "right now." But it wasn't over. Not yet. With the court order in hand, we headed straight to Diane's house with a police escort. But when the front door opened, Diane did something that made the officers freeze. The police cruiser pulled up behind us just as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Sophia sat beside me in the car, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She hadn't spoken since we left the courthouse. She didn't need to. Every emotion she'd been holding in for months was building toward this moment. The moment she'd either get her daughter back or be told she still had to wait. Two officers stepped out first, calm and professional, the emergency custody order already in hand. I followed with Sophia close behind me, her steps hesitant as we approached the front door of Diane's house. This was the house that had taken everything from her. The officer knocked. Hard. The door opened just a crack. Diane's face appeared, tight and furious, her eyes immediately locking onto Sophia. "You can't be here," she snapped. "This is harassment." The officer held up the paperwork. "Ma'am, we have a court order." Diane didn't even look at it. "That child is not stable with her mother. She needs consistency. She needs—" "Ma'am," the officer interrupted, firmer now. "Step aside." Richard appeared behind her, pale and visibly shaken. He looked at Sophia like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. "I'm not giving you Emma," Diane said, her voice rising. "She's upset. You'll traumatize her." Sophia's breath caught. The officer didn't move. Failure to comply will result in obstruction. That's when Diane tried her last move. "She abandoned her child," Diane said loudly, turning toward the officers. "She chose to live in the garage. She works too much. She's unfit." The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. Before she could collapse inward again, I stepped forward. "She didn't abandon her child," I said. "You isolated her. You controlled her finances. You threatened her with lawyers and fear. And you documented it all thinking it would protect you." Diane laughed bitterly. "You can't prove that." I nodded toward the officer. "They already did." The officer turned to Diane. "Ma'am, where is the child?" Silence. Then footsteps. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching a stuffed bunny, eyes wide and confused. "Mommy," she whispered. Sophia dropped to her knees. "Yes, baby," she said, voice breaking. "I'm right here." Emma ran down the stairs and threw herself into her mother's arms, sobbing. Sophia held her like she might disappear if she let go. "I thought you didn't want me anymore," Emma cried. Sophia shook her head fiercely. "Never. I always wanted you." Diane stood frozen. The officers supervised as we gathered Emma's things. It didn't take long. A small suitcase. A few toys. Too little for a child who'd lived there for months. Richard finally spoke. "Sophia, I'm sorry." She didn't look at him. The officer cleared his throat. "We're done here." As we walked out, Diane's voice followed us, sharp and venomous. "This isn't over." I turned back once. "Oh," I said calmly, "it is." The drive-away was quiet, until Emma spoke. "Mommy," she said softly from the back seat, "are we going home now?" Sophia smiled through tears. "Yes, baby, we're going home." That night, Emma slept in a real bed for the first time in months. But while my daughter thought the nightmare was over, the legal battle was just beginning. That night, the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been for a long time. Emma fell asleep almost immediately, curled beneath princess-patterned sheets in a room that finally belonged to her again. Sophia stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her daughter breathe, as if she needed proof this was real. "I keep waiting for someone to knock on the door," she whispered. "Like they'll say there's been a mistake." "There hasn't," I told her. "But you're right about one thing, they won't stop quietly." I was proven right the very next morning. At 9:17 a.m., Catherine called. "They filed an emergency motion," she said. "Diane is claiming grandmother's rights and alleging emotional instability." Sophia's face drained of color. "She's saying I'm unfit again, isn't she?" "Yes," Catherine replied, but this time she overplayed her hand. Within hours, paperwork arrived outlining Diane's claims. According to her, Sophia had voluntarily isolated herself, refused appropriate housing, and failed to provide emotional stability. It was the same lie, just dressed up in legal language. What Diane didn't realize was that every accusation pointed back to evidence already on file. Photos, videos, bank records, witness statements. And one detail she had forgotten entirely: the rental income. James had continued his work quietly. That afternoon, he sent over a new report, copies of rental listings, lease agreements, proof that Richard had continued collecting money from the Maple Street house even after the emergency order. That crossed a line. "You can't violate a court order," Catherine said. "Judges don't forgive that." Sophia paced the living room. What if the judge believes her? She sounds so convincing. I placed my hands on her shoulders. So did she the first time, until the truth showed up. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. Those 3 days were some of the longest of Sophia's life. Diane's lawyer sent letter after letter demanding visitation, threatening appeals, accusing us of manipulation. Catherine answered everyone with a single sentence: "We welcome court review of the full evidentiary record." The morning of the hearing, Sophia wore the same black dress. This time it fit better. She stood straighter. Diane walked in smiling. Confident. Wrong. When Diane began speaking, she leaned heavily into emotion. She cried. She spoke about grandmotherly love, about saving a child from chaos. The judge listened politely. Then Catherine stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She simply laid out the timeline. The financial control, the forged documents, the garage, the isolation, the violation of the emergency order. Then she placed James's newest report on the bench. "Your Honor," she said, "this income was collected illegally after your order was issued." Diane stopped crying. The judge's expression hardened. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said slowly, "you are dangerously close to contempt." Richard stared at the floor. The judge turned to Sophia. "Ms. Reynolds, do you feel safe?" Sophia took a breath. "For the first time in months," she said. "Yes." The courtroom went still. "I see no grounds," the judge said firmly. to alter the current custody arrangement. In fact, given this new information, I am restricting all contact from the grandmother until further notice." Diane gasped. The gavel came down. Case closed. Outside the courtroom, Diane tried to speak to Sophia. Catherine stepped between them. "No contact," she said simply. As we walked away, Sophia exhaled a breath she'd been holding for half a year. "It's really over," she said. "Almost," I replied. The custody battle was finished. But the financial crimes weren't. And the next hearing wouldn't just cost them money. Once custody was settled, most people would have stopped. Sophia didn't. Neither did I. Because while Diane and Richard had lost control of Emma, they still believed they could walk away from everything else. The money, the lies, the damage they'd done behind closed doors. They were wrong. 2 days after the custody ruling, Catherine called again, this time with a different tone in her voice. "The judge referred the financial findings to the district attorney," she said. "Forgery and fraud." Sophia went very still. "Criminal." "Yes," Catherine replied. "Criminal." That word landed heavy. Up until now, everything had been about survival, getting Emma back, escaping control, but criminal charges meant something different. It meant consequences. The investigation moved fast. Bank investigators confirmed that Sophia's signature had been falsified on multiple documents. Not just once, repeatedly, enough to establish intent. The rental income from Maple Street, over $20,000, had been deposited into an account Richard never disclosed. The paper trail was clean and unforgiving. James delivered his final report that Friday. Photos, dates, time-stamps, even audio. Diane instructing Richard on what to say if anyone ever asked questions. That was the moment Richard finally cracked. He called Sophia late that night. She stared at her phone for a long time before answering. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said weakly. "My mom said it was the only way." Sophia's voice was calm, steady, unrecognizable from the woman I'd met in the food court weeks earlier. "You let her steal from me," she said. "You let her isolate me from my daughter, and you signed your name to every lie." Silence. "I'll testify," Richard whispered. "Against her, I just want this to stop." Sophia hung up. She didn't cry. By Monday morning, Diane had been formally notified. Charges were being reviewed. She tried to regain control the only way she knew how, through intimidation. A letter arrived demanding a settlement, another threatening defamation claims, another insisting everything was a misunderstanding. Catherine smiled when she read them. "She's scared," she said, "and she should be." At the next hearing, Diane sat very still. No theatrics, no confidence. The judge reviewed the findings, then looked directly at her. "Financial exploitation of a spouse," he said. "Forgery, coercive control." Diane's lawyer requested a recess. The settlement came quickly after that. Sophia was awarded full ownership of the Maple Street house. All rental income returned, legal fees covered. Richard signed away all financial claims. Diane signed a no-contact agreement. The criminal review was paused, but not dismissed. It would remain on record. And if either of them violated the agreement, charges would be filed immediately. We walked out of the courthouse into warm afternoon sunlight. Sophia closed her eyes and lifted her face to it like someone waking up from a long, dark dream. "I feel light," she said. "You're free," I replied. That night, we went back to Maple Street. Emma ran through the house laughing, reclaiming each room like it had been waiting for her. Sophia stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, touching the walls as if to make sure they were solid. "They tried to erase me," she said quietly. "They failed," I answered. With the legal battles over, life finally began to feel normal again. But healing doesn't happen overnight. The first weeks after everything ended felt strangely quiet. No court dates, no threatening letters, no phone calls that made Sophia flinch. The silence was unfamiliar, almost unsettling, like the calm after a storm when you're not sure if it's really over. Sophia didn't sleep much at first. She would wake up in the middle of the night and walk down the hallway just to check on Emma. Sometimes she stood there watching her daughter breathe, one hand resting on the doorframe as if she needed the wall to steady herself. "I keep expecting someone to take her," she admitted one morning over coffee. "Like they'll say it was all temporary." "It wasn't," I said gently, "and it's not." Still, healing didn't come easily. Sophia started therapy at Catherine's suggestion. At first, she resisted. She said she didn't have time, that she needed to focus on work and Emma. What she didn't say was that she was afraid of what would come out once she started talking. The first session left her exhausted. The second left her angry. The third left her crying in the car. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to change. She started eating again, real meals. She gained back some of the weight she'd lost. The dark circles under her eyes faded. One afternoon, I found her in the backyard sitting under the oak tree, watching Emma push herself on the swing. "She laughs louder now," Sophia said. "Did you notice?" I had. Emma slept through the night again. She stopped asking if her mother was going to disappear. She stopped flinching when adults raised their voices. Children carry fear quietly, until they don't have to anymore. Sophia returned to work full-time at the hospital, and within a month, her supervisor called her into the office. "I thought something was wrong," Sophia told me later. "I was bracing myself." Instead, she'd been offered a promotion. "They said I handled pressure better than anyone they'd ever seen," she said softly. I smiled, if only they knew. Richard attended his supervised visits twice a month. He was polite, careful, almost painfully aware of the damage he'd done. Sophia watched from a distance. "I don't hate him," she admitted one evening. "I hate that he let it happen." That was progress. Hate had been replaced by clarity. Diane, on the other hand, stayed silent. No letters, no calls, no legal threats. The no-contact order held. And that, more than anything, told me she finally understood she'd lost. One afternoon, 6 months after the food court, we threw Emma her 5th birthday party in the backyard. Pink balloons, a crooked princess crown, cupcakes with too much frosting. Sophia laughed freely, unguarded. The sound caught me off guard. I realized then how close we'd come to losing that sound forever. Later, after the guests left and Emma was asleep, Sophia sat beside me on the porch. "I used to think strength meant enduring things quietly," she said. "Now I know it means asking for help before you disappear." I reached for her hand. "You didn't disappear, you survived." She looked out at the yard, the house, the life slowly stitching itself back together. "I almost believed them," she whispered. "That I was unfit, that Emma would be better without me." "That's how control works," I said. "It convinces you the cage is your fault." Sophia nodded. Then she smiled. A real smile. Watching my daughter heal forced me to confront something unexpected. The truth about how easily abuse can hide behind respectability. With time, the anger softened. Not because what happened was forgivable, but because carrying it every day was exhausting. Sophia had learned how to live again, and Emma had returned to being a child instead of a question mark. That's when the thinking began. The quiet kind. The kind that asks how something like this happens without anyone noticing, until it's almost too late. I replayed the early days over and over in my mind. The dinners, the holidays, the small moments I dismissed as normal tension. Richard insisting on handling the finances to reduce stress. Diane offering unsolicited advice, always framed as concern. The subtle way Sophia stopped disagreeing. At the time, none of it screamed danger. It whispered. Control rarely announces itself. It arrives disguised as help. Sophia admitted later that the shift had been gradual. It started with finances, joint accounts, shared passwords, temporary adjustments. Then came guilt, then fear. By the time the threats appeared, she was already isolated. She made it sound logical, Sophia said one afternoon, like she was protecting Emma from my mistakes. That's how manipulation works. It convinces you the harm is for your own good. What frightened me most was how easily it could happen to anyone. Sophia was educated, independent, strong. And still, she nearly lost everything. I began speaking quietly to friends, to neighbors, to women I trusted. The stories came flooding in. A sister who wasn't allowed to work anymore. A coworker whose paycheck went into her husband's account for safekeeping. A friend who slept in a spare room because she'd been told she needed to earn her place back. None of them called it abuse. They called it compromise. Sophia started volunteering at a local support group once a week. At first, she just listened. Then she spoke. Not about the court case. About the silence. About how fear grows when it's unchallenged. One night, she came home shaken. There was a woman there tonight, she said. She lives in her car because her partner controls everything. She thinks it's temporary. I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Temporary is how it always starts. Emma, blissfully unaware of most of it, played in the living room as we talked. She laughed easily now, trusted easily. That was the victory. Sophia knelt beside her and brushed her hair gently. I want her to grow up knowing love doesn't hurt, she said. She will, I told her, because you do. Sometimes people asked why we didn't pursue harsher punishment, why we agreed to a settlement instead of pushing until someone went to jail. The answer was simple. Freedom mattered more than revenge. Sophia didn't need them destroyed. She needed them gone. Still, the record remained. The evidence, the consequences waiting if boundaries were crossed again. That was enough. One evening, months later, Sophia sat across from me with a quiet certainty in her eyes. If this story helps even one person leave sooner, she said, then it mattered. I nodded. That's when I realized the story wasn't really about what Diane and Richard did. It was about what happens when someone finally says, "This isn't normal," and refuses to be silent. Looking back, I understand now that this story wasn't just about my daughter. It was about the moment a family chooses to stand up instead of look away. Life didn't return to the way it was before. It became something better. Not because the past disappeared, but because it no longer controlled us. A year after that afternoon in the food court, the house on Maple Street felt alive again. The oak tree in the front yard had filled out, its branches heavy with leaves. Wind chimes hung near the porch, their soft sound drifting through open windows on warm evenings. Sophia had changed in ways that were impossible to miss. She trusted herself now. She asked questions, read contracts carefully, spoke up when something felt wrong. She no longer apologized for taking up space in her own life. That strength didn't come from winning in court. It came from surviving what almost broke her. Emma, now older and louder and endlessly curious, raced her bike up and down the driveway. She still called me Gamma, still asked for extra bedtime stories, still believed the world was mostly good. And because of her mother, it was. Sometimes Sophia, and I talked about that day at the mall. The scariest part, she admitted once, was how close I was to believing them completely. I understood that now. Control doesn't rely on force alone. It relies on doubt. Diane and Richard had counted on silence, on isolation, on the idea that no one would notice until it was too late. They were wrong. People sometimes asked me how I knew when to step in. The truth is, I didn't know at first. I just listened. I watched my daughter's eyes instead of her words. I noticed the fear where confidence used to be, and when I asked questions, I didn't accept easy answers. That's all it took. Presence. If there's one lesson this experience carved into me, it's this. Abuse doesn't always look like bruises or shouting. Sometimes it looks like kindness with strings attached, like help that slowly takes everything away. And love. Love notices. Love asks again when the first answer doesn't feel right. Sophia once told me she felt ashamed for not leaving sooner. I told her something I believe with my whole heart. You didn't fail, I said. You survived long enough for help to find you. On Emma's next birthday, she blew out her candles and made a wish. When I asked her what it was, she smiled mischievously. I wish that Mommy is always happy, she said. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She didn't need wishes anymore. She had something stronger. Support. Safety. And the knowledge that she was never alone, even when she felt like she was. As for me, I'd make the same choice again, without hesitation. I'd ask the hard questions. I'd make the phone calls. I'd stand in every courtroom and confront every lie. Because that's what family does. They show up. They protect. And when someone tries to tear you apart quietly, they make sure it gets loud enough for the truth to be heard. If this story felt familiar, if you saw yourself or someone you love in any part of it, don't ignore that feeling. Sometimes all it takes is one person paying attention to change everything.